Okay, so as we spoke about before, this is the Dali Basics course, and here what we're trying to do is we're trying to build up some skills in the market, and we've identified parts of the market or technical parts which people need more information on. And this has been a series of webinars we've done this year on different parts of KNX and different products and Dali. So this is the second time around for the Dali, which was really popular last time. So a little bit of introduction. This is for newcomers to the Dali world. Like I said before, this is not an in-depth view of the latest and greatest of what Dali is and what it has to offer, but more of a non-biased view or point of what Dali, some key things in the presentation, like what is it, where is it, and why is it? Topology, rules for wiring and power supplies, and we look at a typical wiring part of it. We also look at network design. We'll take you on to commissioning, testing, troubleshooting. We look at working with other systems, and in particular, I do a live demonstration of ETS and how to set up some of our Dali gateways in ETS, and also the Dali addressing tools that come with those products. So we'll have a look at those. We'll have a look at what Dali device types are and the Dali standard. So what is Dali? Well, Dali stands for Digital Addressable Lighting Interface. It's an open, and now it's a standardized digital communication technology for primary lighting control, but it's extended way beyond that now, and we can do many things with Dali control. It's a bus or a system where we interact with inputs, which are sensors and switches, and other systems such as KNX and other ones as we know. It's smart, flexible, and it's a way to control lights through a 2-wire bus. It's backed now by the Dali Alliance, also known as the Digital Illumination Interface Alliance, or the DIAA, which is a global industry organization of a Dali control. So Dali was originally introduced in commercial buildings as a cheap and economical way to retrofit offices and lighting, whereby the lights could generally stay in position and the walls move around to cater for changes for tenants. This was a great achievement, advancement for lowering costs, and now no more rewiring, just programming and reprogramming of lights to suit. So just to dive in that a little bit, basically all the light fittings sit on a Dali bus. Okay, the light fittings in the offices were set in their positions. And what would happen is, as customers or tenants would move in and out of the buildings, they would reconfigure the walls. Now, what Dali allowed us to do is, instead of wiring and putting lights into groups, we could do it theoretically through programming and make the changes just with a programmer and not have to rewire anything. In the late 1990s, it was developed to better digital technology to help meet the needs of the lighting market. Tronic and other well-known manufacturers, Osram, Helvar, Philips, jointly developed the Dali protocol. And originally Dali was open protocol, and it's really good having an open protocol. What it really missed was something to keep. So those people that don't know, originally with Dali, manufacturers would use the Dali protocol and they change a little bit to suit themselves. And what would happen generally is you'd have to have someone's gateway with another manufacturer, with the same manufacturer's fittings. They would be matched. This means they're still talking Dali, but they've changed it a little bit to suit themselves, and now it wasn't completely open. Since then, Dali produced the Dali Working Group, and now that's transformed into the Dali Alliance. And what they've done is, which really importantly, is they've standardized the Dali protocol, which truly means that you can have anyone's fittings with anyone's sensors, with anyone's gateways. Dali was there to replace 0 to 10 and 1 to 10, and also DSI technology. Nowadays, Dali's in a lot of projects. It's well known, it's standardized. It's easy for lighting manufacturers to ensure correct dimming and control of their fittings. So what we see a lot with lighting manufacturers is they've got a light fitting, the best way to dim or control that fitting. They're never really sure about the best means of that, but they can also make sure that they have a corresponding Dali driver that's been matched to suit it, or they've tested to suit it, and then they can sell it in many markets that way. There's been recent advancements in Dali, and that can now control color. Really important things like human-centric lighting, which is changing of color temperature in lighting to suit the time of day to keep people enthused and revitalized, as well as looking after the occupants for making them feel better. And also we've got things like exit emergency testing, supervision, fault and maintenance monitoring, and even wireless Dali. So topology, this is a really important part of this kind of course, and this is where a lot of the Dali problems originate from, and it's incorrect wiring. So whether you're the installer or the electrician that's installing the wiring, or you're the integrator or the programmer, you need to know what you're doing right here. If you're the integrator or the programmer, you need to know how to instruct the electrician how to install this stuff. And this is generally where most of the problems come from in Dali. So Dali is a 2-wire bus. It's just 2 wires that can transmit it over the network. The wiring topology can be star or daisy chain, or it can be a combination of daisy chain and star. However, just like all the serial bus communications, ring topology or closing the loop anywhere is strongly discouraged, and especially with Dali. Dali can have cable lengths up to 300 meters when you're using a 1.5 mil squared cross section cable, and the maximum voltage drop of 2 volts on the Dali line and the system. Dali networks need a power supply. That power supply facilitates power for the Dali devices and also handles the communication. And the Dali bus, typically we see the Dali bus somewhere between 2 and 22.2 volts. Okay, it can drop a little bit. We've seen some, obviously some average buses, Dali bus voltages down a fair bit from there. We're actually 2 volts down from there, which is 10 volts, but that's what it is. The maximum Dali current is 250 milliamps. Now, just going back a step, I always like to highlight is Dali is called a digital addressable lighting interface. Okay, so it's a means or it's a way we can talk to light fittings. It doesn't constitute a control system. I don't want you to get confused with control systems that are based upon Dali, because they usually have a fairly fast backbone. It doesn't matter if you're using Dali with Rapix, KNX, CBus, Dynalite, just to name a few. They've all got the same Dali networks. And that Dali network, there's a fairly low speed for that Dali network, because that's about 1200 baud or 2.2 kilobits a second. To give you some perspective, KNX, CBus, Dynalite, and all those control systems hover around 9.6 to 10 kilobits a second. So it's a tenth of the speed. So that's why we've got to keep that in mind when we're looking at Dali networks and how much we can put on them. The other interesting fact about Dali networks is they're non-polarity conscious. It doesn't matter which way you get the cables, it's going to work. So what I've done here is I've kind of changed this slide from the last time we did it, and I've included this new slide to give people a real representation of typically how Dali networks happen. So what I've got here, you can see on the left-hand side is circuit breakers. Those circuit breakers are fed from different phases. They can be fed from different parts of the building. And those circuit breakers fed active, neutral, and earth through to light fittings. Okay, so that way the light fittings are conveniently arranged depending on the circuitry, the amount of wiring, how many boards, and stuff like that. It's got no influence on the Dali. To make these Dali fittings, they must be Dali ballasts in the fittings. And so what I've got coming up down the bottom now, I've got, for an example, an ABB and a Theban Dali to KNX gateway. And that job is to convert signals from the KNX bus to the Dali bus, and from the Dali bus back to the KNX bus. So what we have here is our Dali wiring. So that's the wiring I talked about, where it can be 300 meters. It's 2 wires. We can do a daisy chain or star, as you can see in the second part, but we can't create the loop anywhere. You'll notice nowhere I've created the loop. So once we've got that configuration, we've got all those fittings irrespective of what circuit they're on the same Dali universe or network. What we do then is simply we give every network an address. The Dali addresses can go anywhere from 0 up to 63, or as we know it, 1 through to 64. So the maximum number of fittings you can have on one Dali network is 64 fittings. And we'll talk a little bit more about how many fittings we really should put on there. And we address the fittings on the second network. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting, and this is the part that makes the flexibility, and you can see why I have office blocks that can change their configuration depending on where they want to group their fittings. So what we can do then from the gateways or the tools, we can group. Group 1 can be fittings 1 and 2, and group 2 can be the rest of the fittings. And then we can go through and group on the second gateway, group 1s, group 2, group 3. Keeping in mind, when we have a look a bit further in the slides, we can have up to 64 fittings, although we shouldn't ever have up to put 64 on there. We'll talk about that in a sec. And Dali will support up to 16 groups. So of those 64 fittings, you can have 16 groups. Okay. Now, the beauty of when we talk about using KNX with Dali is if we had 2 Dali gateways or 2 universes, and we had to have switching of a commonality between those 2 universes, we can always stick the Dali groups 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3 from each different gateway into the same KNX group address. And then from the customer's perspective, it's all one group or one switching group. So looking at design, it's up to 64 fittings addressable in a Dali network. However, industry standard says and dictates to us that most professionals don't put anywhere more than 50 to 55 fittings on the bus. Why is that? Well, we talked again about the speed. When we have the full network full of speed, it's not the fastest network. And the other thing is allowing for future Dali fittings to fit onto that network. So leaving a little bit of headroom, don't fill your networks right up. As a Dali minimum, just quickly, I have to talk here just quickly. When we're looking at this Dali, we're talking about the original Dali. So there's 2 types of Dali now. There's Dali 1, as it's kind of known now, thanks to the successor, which is Dali 2. This course or this presentation is just dealing with Dali 1, but we'll have a little look at Dali 2. And that can support up to 16 groups. So those 64 fittings, they can live in up to 16 groups. Okay, those 64 fittings can have up to 16 Dali scenes. Each Dali network requires a master. Okay, it's a slave master relationship. And then some special cases, which I'm going to show you following on through this, is actually we can have what we call now a multi-master. So multi-master is originally a proprietary thing, and now it's been accepted as part of the Dali 2. So what you've got to take into considerations when you're looking at designing a network is the size of the area and the required equipment. So remember, you've got 300 meters and you've got of cabling for the Dali network. They can go across multiple circuits and multiple phases, but you're limited to 300 meters of that cable by daisy chain or star and 64 devices. But as we saw before, we really want to keep it to no more than 55. We got to look at when we're taking in consideration the design of the network, the functions that are required. Dali has a lot of functionality, and the type of fitting you buy will represent that functionality. So the types of devices or Dali devices we can look at is tunable light. Are we going to have human-centric lighting? RGB or RGBW, is that a factor the customer wants? Fault reporting, do we want these Dali fittings to report a certain fault, like a ballast fault, a lamp fault, or is the Dali requirement for Dali 2? Just as a side note there, Dali 1 can run on Dali 2, but it can't happen the other way around. Okay. When we're looking at Dali networks, are the gateways, we've got to look at the gateways and the system it's connecting to. Okay, so even though we might have Dali-based systems, they're always usually connected to something else. Are there exit emergencies and requirements for testing? It's a very important thing. So the exit emergency part, what is it testing? How long is it testing? What are the requirements to meet the standard of our local service rules? Do we need inputs or sensors, or can those inputs and sensors go onto the gateway or the systems that's connecting to it. A real good tip is, if you're looking Dali stuff, there's a lot of Dali products on the market. And through my experience, I've got to tell you, only deal with Dali certified products. Okay, this is the only true way you have any recourse if something goes wrong. So any of the gateways, any of the sensors, any of the fittings, they must have the Dali logo. There's two types of Dali logos. There's the Dali logo 1 and the Dali logo 2. If you're not sure about if this device is Dali certified, there is websites where you can go and see the trademark has been issued to the product, and this certifies the product in the database to ensure that you have got a certified Dali brand. There's lots of overseas and particularly Asian manufacturers produce Dali products, and they say they're Dali. They haven't been tested or certified, and sometimes you waste lots and lots of time with having illegitimate products. Commissioning and testing. Control gear and Dali networks can use up to 2 milliamps from the Dali. Be careful, like we talked about before, some of these Dali products that are not certified can draw up to more. And I've seen particularly projects, for example, Dali relays that will work fine on the Dali. They're not Dali certified, but they actually use more than 2 milliamps. So when you're looking at where your Dali power supply is, make sure it's going to cover all those devices and the whole consumption of the line. Double addressing. What can happen is, as you saw in the slide before, if we've got multiple circuits and we're trying to commission a Dali network in a building and someone turns one circuit off and leaves one circuit on, the Dali gateway or the Dali master can issue addresses. And then what can often happen is they turn that circuit off and turn the new circuit back on, and those same addresses get issued to the Dali network. Then when they turn both circuits back on, you've got double addresses. So that's something to look out for. The default configuration of a Dali ballast, usually it goes to 100% when there's no Dali comms available. That can be changed, so be careful of that. But generally, what happens in a gateway or any kind of master device, there's usually, and I'll show you in the KNX ones, there's usually an overriding broadcast control, which can turn the whole loop, the Dali off and the whole Dali on. So when Mr. Electrician says to you, oh, the Dali lights are working, they will work if they just have power to them, and if they don't have Dali bus to them, they will be on at 100%. Make sure they check the wiring's correct. There's no loops. Make sure they check that the voltages are correct. It doesn't meet within specification. Is the furthest Dali device still within the Dali voltage limits? How big has the network been? Is there mix between Dali universes? That's a real common one. As you saw from my slide before, these networks can be run out and someone taps from one network to another. Can you send out a Dali broadcast command? Masters and broadcast functionality. So like I said before, a real good way for commissioning a Dali network is before the programming starts, is to be able to broadcast the whole network on, broadcast the whole network off. If every light in that network responds to that command, then we know we've got communication. Commissioning and testing software is connected to the Dali bus or to the testing device, usually a PC. So there's multiple ways, and I've got the Rapix tool there that can clip onto the Dali bus as long as there's a Dali network power supply. And what we're going to look at in our little thing is there's a few different softwares to use. I know there's softwares that plug in through USB. Our Dali gateways, particular ones we're looking at the moment, we use the KNX bus to program the Dali networks. So we use the KNX to access the Dali side of the Dali gateways, and that way we can communicate. We don't need to plug into the bus or anything. And another advantage of that, if you're smart enough to set up remote access, then you can program the network remotely. Working with other systems. If we consider Dali to be a way to talk to light fittings, then we really need to look at the control systems that work with Dali to achieve control in the buildings. Some of the systems and protocols we find in the buildings generally have an interface or a gateway to interact with the Dali system. A lot of manufacturers of systems, including KNX, are usually members of both. KNX and the Dali Association. And a lot of thought's been put into how best the systems complement each other and work together. Generally, each manufacturer has its own Dali commissioning and testing tool. However, we can do some short addressing and some things with others, but I would suggest that you use the Dali commissioning tool that comes with the device. Some tools are product specific, others are generic. It's advised that the specific tools are used where available. If you're using a generic Dali tool in conjunction with a specific tool, it's best suggested that you know the idiosyncrasies between the mitigation to mitigate problems. So when we're looking at that, you really must know or speak to someone before you go operating a generic Dali commissioning tool in conjunction with the dedicated or the specialist Dali commissioning tool for that product, and then we can get around things. Some of these popular KNX and generic tools are ABB iBus tool. So I'm going to show you a live example of that. The Theban ETS plugin. So the Theban Dali gateway, the way they do that. That Dali gateway we're going to look at is also a Dali multi-master. So some interesting. Rapix tool, it's not something we do, but it's a really common commissioning tool. And to be honest, it's a really nice one. The advantage of the Rapix tool over most is that it can be done on a mobile device. So your phone can do commissioning and you can walk around. If any of you know Dali commissioning, it's probably one of the most labor intensive parts of your programming. And Master Configurator, it was one of the original, and it's got an in-depth have a look at knowledge. So the two that I've chosen today is the Dali P64 from Theban and the Dali device, which is very common, ABB DGS 2.64.5.1. So when we look at parameters, this is on the KNX side. We need to consider what we need to do with the gateway and what functions we need from the gateway, and we can set up our individual groups, and that group can be named, and all the configurations that you consider important to that group can be parameterized in that group. We need to know what type of fittings are, if they're Dali temperature, Dali control, RGB, or just normal Dali device. So we commission those, and then what we do, we link those groups or individual ballast controls into group addresses on the KNX side of things. So we've got the ability to turn group 1 on, dim group 1, set a group 1 dimming level on the statuses back. And we can have much more things like fault statuses, and the list goes on, operation hours and stuff like that. So once we've done that, now we need to commission the Dali network side of things. So that's kind of commission the Dali gateway and the KNX, how the KNX interacts with it. Now we need to commission the Dali gateway. So interesting enough with this gateway, if any of you people know a bit about ETS, this is a plugin or an app. So this app is free, and basically it sits within the parameters of the Dali gateway. There's no separate software, and you could automatically commission straight away. All you need to do is give the Dali gateway individual address. Then we can access it through the KNX bus to commission the Dali side of things. Now, I haven't got a live working example on here, so I'm just going to run through a little bit of what happens. Basically, we scan the Dali network and it brings up a heap of addresses here, and those addresses get populated and we can bring those in. As we bring those addresses in, we can readdress them to suit what our Dali plan is. Once we've got all our fittings in and addressed to the right heights, then we can put them into groups. So basically, if I want fitting 10 to go into group 3, I just drag it and drop it. And then fitting 10 is in group 3. So now when I turn group 3 on, fittings 10 and 12 will turn on. Okay, and you can see here the groups that are associated. If I turn group 1 on, then fittings 1 and 3 will turn on, and group 2 will turn on too. So all I need to do is put all these fittings into groups. It's actually happening live as I'm doing it if I was live on a network. So as I'm doing it, there's no downloading, saving or anything. It's automatically commissioning to the network, and I can automatically control these groups just to test to see straight away. I can do on, off, blink, broadcast, or check where the new thing is. So again, quite a nice little tool. This the beauty about this, which we don't have time for today, is the ability for this to have motion detectors and inputs on the Dali bus. So this is a true Dali multi-master tool, and they can be commissioned and described through KNX as well. So we had that question already. Can the Dali, in the last course, can the Dali motion detectors and switches turn on stuff in the KNX? Yes, it can happen. It's not advised because there's a lag between KNX and Dali, and that is due to the Dali network being a little bit slow. Okay, so usually we like to use KNX sensors to turn on Dali stuff, but it is possible to do that as well. The next gateway is probably one of the most popular gateways in Australia at the moment. It has been for a while for good reason, and that is the the ABB Dali gateway. So the ABB Dali gateway comes in a few different models. It comes in 1 channel and 2 channel. So that's 1 universe and 2 channel universe. So it is technically possible to have 128 fittings on 1 Dali gateway. It comes in a base module and a premium module. So the base module is just for normal Dali control, and premium module is for Dali 2. And Dali 2 accounts for a lot of RGB and tunable white and those kind of functionalities. So what we do is very similar. We go through the parameters on the KNX parameters inside the ETS, and we talk about what type of group we want to enable, if we want to control individual ballasts, if we want to look at testing exit and emergency fittings, we want to do Dali scenes and sequences and all those kind of things. And then from that output, we can go straight into groups, and we can name our groups. And so this group might be test group, hall. And we can say additional functionality we want in here, the type of color control or none, that then parameterizes this gateway and these functions to suit what you need through the KNX. So what happens is exactly the same way in the KNX. We link this Dali gateway to group addresses. And here I call that a hall. We can link that to a group address. We could turn group 1 on or off, or dim it, or relative dim it. And the same goes with up to group 16 and group things. So I haven't enabled individual ballast control, but if I was to enable individual ballast control, which actually I will, so I will enable ballast 1 and 2 for individual control. I won't go through to the parameters too much, apart from showing you that they're available. So here we go. Here's group 16, 15, and here's ballast 1. If we want to individually control any of the Dali ballast individually, we can do that as well. Okay. So what do we use for the Dali programming for the ABB Dali gateways? Well, very interestingly, they decided to make their own software, and this software makes a point-to-point connection. And what it does, I'm just about to open it now. Again, this is a demo part of the tool, so it's running a simulation. Basically, all we need to know is the Dali DGS or the Dali gateway address, and we can connect to it. So I'm going to do a simulation and connect to the Dali gateway that I showed you. This uses the KNX communication interface, whatever you're using for your ETS to program. This will use the same configuration. And straight away we can see how many devices are there, if there's a conflict, if there's a fault, if there's power onto the network. I'm not sure if I got up to it, but I just was running through some really important features of this gateway and also the Theban gateway. As long as they're connected to power inside the site and they've got Dali fittings on them, without any programming, without any integration, without any KNX bus, these can be turned on, and the installers, being the electricians, can press a broadcast button and turn the whole network on and the whole network off. This is really, really handy for you guys that have done any kind of Dali, and you understand that some of the most labor-intensive part of the Dali network is figuring out faults when you're first there. If you can eliminate that by putting in your terms and conditions within your quotes or within your projects that the installers and electricians must test the Dali network before you get there, then this is going to save you lots and lots of time and hassles. Okay, so important is when we're working through this tool, as soon as I select configuration mode, we're now live with the network, and we're changing things as we go. So a really interesting part of this is with this Dali selection, when we're looking for net devices on the network, when we select them, that device can go to 100% and every other device can go to 0. That's really good if it's a new job, but when you're in an existing job for an office and you're trying to fault find, you might want to turn that around. So you might want to have the unselected fittings at 100% and the one you're selecting at 0 or possibly blinking. Okay. So again, we can do a report of the Dali devices, which is really handy as well. So now the next tab is the Dali network. Okay, so what I can see here is output A and output B. Okay, so on output A, I can see, I'll just zoom out a little bit. So there we go. On output A, I can see that there's so many fittings and all the addresses of the fittings. And I can see here, I can set the broadcast to turn the whole network on and the whole network off. I can also see here automatically addressing is no addressing, but I can also see here there's unaddressed Dali devices. So if I've put it on a new network or the electrician said, hey, by the way, I've just stuck a couple more lights onto the network, then you're going to need to trigger Dali addressing. And what that does, it finds all unaddressed Dali devices and it gives them an address. Okay, so then there'll be a random address. We can see if there's conflicts in the groups or there's a conflict between what the ballasts say and what the gateway says. We can monitor, we can acknowledge faults. Okay, so when we're starting out on a Dali network, we need to find out what address is what fitting. If I was to click on this fitting, then it would choose whatever I've chosen and make the whole network go dim and only that fitting would blink, or do the opposite way around. Or if I want to have a look at the groups, then I can click on that group now. The whole network would be dark and then just those ones selected in that group would blink. I can also change these groups as well. If I click on the group and I press the minus button here, now I take those out of that group and I can put them onto a new group. So if I put onto a new group and I want those two fittings to be in the next new group, I hit the plus symbol while I've got it selected on the group, and now I've changed them from this group to this group. Okay. If I need to readdress a Dali fitting, for example, if I had address 28 and on my plan I need 28 to be address 1, I drop it and drag it to address 1, and then those addresses will then change. Okay. I can clear memberships of the Dali single Dali device. So if I want to clear the memberships of this Dali device, I can clear it here, or I can clear the memberships of the groups for all the Dali network figures. Another interesting thing is if I find that I have a duplicate address, and the way I'd see that would be if I clicked on then two fittings in that network, then we're on, there's a possibility that I've got a duplicate address there. And what I'd have to do from then is then I'd have to clear that Dali reset that single Dali device, or I could clear the whole bus and then I'd go back and readdress the whole bus, and I could do that as well. Another really interesting or an important little feature of the Dali iBus tool is when you're trying to find a fitting, and it might be in a cupboard, it might be somewhere, you can have someone on site that's helping you do the Dali dressing. And what you can do is, if you can't find it going through your building, then you can ask someone to look at a certain fitting that you haven't addressed yet and say, is that fitting on or off now? And if they say yes, it's on, you press yes, and then it'll change and it'll say, is the fitting on or off now? And basically it deduces down the fittings by process of elimination. So it leaves you with the exact fitting that you're after. This is an absolute godsend for anyone that's did Dali networks. And basically it tells you exactly the fitting you're after without having to flick through the whole 64 or 50 or 5 odd fittings that you have on there. So that's fitting 23. We can go through the Dali, sorry, my computer's taking a while, and we can see what device type the Dali is, what number it is, what functions it is, how bright it is, if it's turned on. And we can go into details for that as well with the Dali gateway. So we can say group 1 or device number 1. We can turn it the brightness up and down. We can turn it on and off. We can see any of the operating hours, any functions. And if this, which case it is, it's a color control fitting, then we can actually drag the color control to change the color of the fitting depending on where that little arrow or circle is in the swatch there. Okay, so again, I think if we go to device number 6, it's no color control. So that would just be a normal fitting and we could just dim it up and down. And then that's a way to control and configure the Dali network without actually having to open any other tool. Dali device types. It's important to understand that there are different Dali device types. These device types are expressed through the standard and they specify what the functionality of the devices have. It's critical when you're designing and commissioning a Dali network that you have the compatibility and the support of those devices and device types from the controllers, gateways, and ballast switches and sensors. So it's pretty simple, guys. If we have a Dali type 8 control ballast, then we're going to need a Dali type 8 controller or gateway. Okay. If we want exit and emergencies, then the gateway that's doing the control needs to suit Dali device type that also suits the fittings. Okay. You can't put Dali type 8 fittings on a device that or a gateway that doesn't support Dali type 8. It just won't work. If a device is truly compatible, then they're required to have the Dali trademark logo with supporting documentation on what Dali types are supported. Remember, the logo and the database are your guarantee that they have been tested to that standard. Those inferior products without don't and usually are the culprit with all the problems. I see this time and time again. People coming to us, I can guarantee you every product we sell is Dali certified. We just don't run the risk. And every time, it doesn't matter whether it's us or someone else's gateway, I see inferior fittings that are usually bought much cheaper that don't have the logo, or they've had the logo falsely put on them and they're not available in a database. And then there's usually problems with them. The Dali standard. So Dali 2 is an industry standardized protocol and is specified in the multi-part international standard, as well as by the new specifications written by the Digital Alliance. Dali 2 is a certification program which is based on the latest versions of the Dali protocol and is developed and maintained by the Dali Alliance. The IEC standard was restructured in late 2014 for ease and use to facilitate the development of Dali 2. Many improvements were made to the standard, including additions of new commands and features. One of the most significant changes and additions to the control devices, including the application controls input devices, which were not included at the original version of the Dali standard. Dali 2 is also much more comprehensively tested than Dali 1, with a strong focus on device interoperability. Dali 2 test results are independently verified by the Dali Alliance before certification is guaranteed. So again, when we've moved from Dali 1 to Dali 2, that's been a highlight of what the organisation and the standards have controlled and tried to pull into line, and that's the interoperability and compatibility. Everyone making sure they're to the standard. So just to leave you with, Ivory Egg is a technical distributor. We're not an integrator. We're not installer, okay? But we're not just KNX either. We're much more broader than that. We do most of the products we support are all open protocol or standardized protocol products. So we don't usually get involved with anything that's proprietary, because that's just limitation on what the manufacturer can or can't do with it. And as part of that, Dali 2 is a very strong part of what our offer is. So I thought I'd leave you with a really nice little product that's just been brought out from Theban. It's a Dali 2 room solution. Okay, so it's not connected to any system. It is a system in itself. Basically, it's a Dali 2 room solution for a single room, handling all aspects of dial lighting control. So The sensors and the inputs can talk to Dali fittings, and they are the Dali master with Dali power supplies built into them. They have human-centric lighting function with tunable white and RGB functionalities. They have time controls and much, much more. For the single room solution, all the components, doesn't matter whether they're detectors, sensor switch actuators, push button interfaces, as well as the app for the startup, are available from one single supplier. So that means that every part you're buying is from Theban or from the manufacturer Theban through us as a part of the full Dali 2 certified and compliant. We believe this solution is the best but limited to offices, classrooms, lecture halls, especially care homes and hospitals. It has a full range of existing products with the ability to do a heap of things. It's all programmed through an iPad or a tablet of sorts. And it's a very quick and intuitive way to get involved with Dali. So keep a lookout for that. Ask all your sales reps and they can give you a live demonstration and price you up for some Dali 2 room solution. It's one of the most unique, nice room solutions I've seen for a long time. Has a full array of human-centric lighting, scheduling, and all those kind of things that are really important.